Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Ontario Caregiver Organization webinar series. Today, we'll investigate perspectives and tools to translate and transform the guilt and resentment that you may be experiencing as a caregiver. Self-care efforts are important, and today we'll take you a step beyond. Our speakers will help you identify underlying needs and then imagine strategies to meet those needs more deeply. This will help you develop the personal reserves you need to care for others. I'm Susan Bach, and I'll be moderating this webinar today. I'm a program lead at the Ontario Caregiver Organization. I'm pleased to introduce today's speakers, Marion Little and Mieko Ise, who have worked together on today's presentation. I'll tell you a little bit more about them now, then turn it over to Marion and Mieko to get us started. Marion holds an MA in Dispute Resolution, a BA in Linguistics, and manages community services and training for the John Howard Society of Peterborough. She teaches topics that include conflict resolution, violence prevention, and communication skills for adults and youth. Marion has taught undergraduate and graduate level courses in mediation and nonprofit management. She has also served as executive director for several social service agencies in British Columbia. Mieko Ise has been a caregiver to both her parents and in-laws for the past 10 years. It is Mieko's intention to use her lived experiences to help other caregivers with their journeys and to be a catalyst for enhancing interactions between caregivers and healthcare professionals. Currently, she's involved with the Ontario Caregiver Organization, advising on the creation of new caregiver programs and services. Welcome, Marion and Mieko. So nice to see you.
Thanks so much, Susan, and really wonderful to be here together with you, Mieko. Welcome, everybody. I'm so looking forward to spending the next hour or so together and learning together. Before we begin, I really like to take a moment to acknowledge the land that I'm sitting on and the traditional territory here, and invite you to just take a moment to reflect on where you might be. And if you're not familiar with that, your local college or university often has a land acknowledgement that you can learn from. So today, it's sunny out, it's gorgeous, we've had some rain, the plants are just perking right up, and I'm so grateful to be on the Michi-Sagig Anishinaabe territory here in Nogo-Jiwanong, Peterborough. And Nogo-Jiwanong means the place at the end of the rapids. And this is a place that has been stewarded by Anishinaabe or Ojibwe people from Curve Lake and Hiawatha, Alderville, and Rama, Georgina Island, and Scugog First Nations for generations. And so I'm really grateful to them, and I'm grateful to the land itself. And so this is just a nice way for us to locate ourselves. And whenever we're thinking about communication skills and being in right relationship with ourselves and the people we love, for me, it's important to remember we're always doing that on this continent in the context of a larger relationship between non-Indigenous and Indigenous folks. So Mieko, you and I have been having some conversations preparing for this, and we thought it would be really nice for all the caregivers online today to just hear a little bit of your reflections, just as we were talking about the concepts and how they fit for you as a way to locate this work and this presentation in the life of a caregiver. So I'm just going to turn it over to you for your reflections for the next little bit, Mieko. Thank you.
Well, hi, everyone. So I have no professional degrees on how to be a caregiver. I have learned on the ground and as I was going along. And my reflections, I just want to point out what I've learned. I have mastered nothing, but I've definitely grown and become better at it. So that is my intention, to share my lived experiences, as Susan said, so that, hopefully some of you will gain some benefit, and hopefully it give you some ease on your caregiving journey. As Susan said, I started about actually more than 10 years ago now. But anyways, I found at the time there was so much information on the diagnosis and prognosis of my care recipients, but there was very, very little information for caregivers. And when you boil it down, it's like what I really needed help and support with was, because there's so many things we get challenged with that we've never been involved in before. So everything is new. Is I just wanted to learn how to think better, act better, and most importantly, feel better, because a lot of the caregiving, it brings up a lot of emotions that are quite difficult. So one thing that Mary and I were talking about was about self-empathy, and we had a really good conversation, because I think there's a lot of confusion between self-care and self-empathy. And I just wanted to point out that I learned early on that self-care is not self-empathy. It just, a girl's weekend massage is nice, but that is not self-empathy. I really found that in order to be empathetic to myself, I had to honor my feelings and needs and nurture myself through everything, all the good times and all the bad times. But then I also had to develop some self-awareness as to what I really needed, because a lot of times we get confused. Like, I have a personal example. Early on, when I would get some feedback from my care recipient, so you're working around, you're trying the best you can, you're working really hard, and they give you some feedback. And I normally am not a defensive person, but I got overly defensive. And I had to take a step back and think, was I actually being verbally attacked to justify my defensiveness? Or what did I really need? And what I found out what I really need is I needed reassurance that I was doing a good job as a caregiver. And so once I got to that point, I realized, oh, so that's what I need. And then I could start nurturing myself and honoring myself from that truth, as opposed to just being defensive and flying off the handle. The other thing I learned too is that, you just have to accept your feeling that you, as a caregiver, you're going to feel guilty, you're going to feel shame, and you're going to feel resentment. It's part of the job. But I found it didn't need to define me or my identity or the job. Like, I guess the best examples, like we say to our kids, it's like, you did some bad behavior, but you're not the behavior. So it's like you can do or say something that's shameful, but you are not a shameful person. So it's the same kind of thing. And the other thing that I noticed is my purpose, is that, when I first started, I thought, okay, I've got this, I got to have everything under control. I've got to be perfect. Well, whatever that means. And I had to, fix everything. I had to have all the right answers. I had to have all my ducks in a row. But then that faded pretty fast, because I don't know about you, but I cannot work in excellence 24/7. So, I had to find that, wherever I am today, I had to offer the care at that level, but still keep my heart and mind open, that I can grow in my skills and my capacity. But so don't spend time feeling bad about yourself because you made mistakes or whatever. Just know that you did the best today, and tomorrow is another day. And then I guess the last point is that I had to stop controlling my feelings. I used to get after myself for feeling this way or that way. And then I realized, feelings are spontaneously come up when you're triggered. And as a caregiver, I'm sure you all know, we get triggered a lot. So I just now learned to let the feelings come up, rise, and then, but the good news is I was able to choose how to respond to those feelings. So I would take time to examine them and see and say, and so many times I would have this talk to myself. I think when I was on the subway, people must have thought I was crazy, because I'm going on thinking, okay, I've been down this road of guilt before. I'm not going to go there. I'm going to change that thought right now. I'm going to be nice to myself. I'm going to, but I'll work harder to be better. But, it's just that self-talk and actions, and stop beating yourself up. So those are sort of the main things. I guess that's, I'm limited in my wisdom. I guess that's all I could give today, Marion. So I hand it back to you.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Mieko. It's not limited at all. That's such a rich offering to the community here, and it's been really wonderful just chatting back and forth with you about some of these concepts that I've been practicing in my career and in my personal life as a caregiver and as somebody working in a caregiving or social service profession in the wider world. So thanks for that, Mieko, and I really appreciate your emphasis on being open to learning and really being compassionate with ourselves. And yeah, so I think that that's really the heart of what we're going to talk about today. So we're just going to go through some of the concepts that Mieko and I had a chance to talk about on the phone several times leading up to this workshop. And the process that I use for working through shame and guilt and resentment is something called nonviolent communication. And this is a process that was developed by a fellow named Marshall Rosenberg, Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, back in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. And it comes out of his work with severely disabled children who were being excluded from classrooms. And in that era, it was quite common to send people off to completely different facilities and exclude children completely from the classroom. And he was committed to finding ways for teachers to include children of all kinds of needs in their classrooms. And simultaneous with that, he was doing a lot of work around civil rights. And so this work really comes out of his questions, his big questions about how do we take those grand ideas of compassionate nonviolence that Gandhi and Martin Luther King and restorative justice all really espouse, and engage with those in our inner dialogue with ourselves, in our interpersonal dialogue with others, and when we're negotiating and interacting with systems. So this is a very brief introduction today, and I'm gonna try really hard to mind the time. I'm notoriously difficult for me to keep an eye on time, so I'm gonna do my best today to respect your time. We'll do a quick overview. I'll outline some core concepts for you, and I hope you have a pen and paper handy, because that will really help. I have an exercise that I'd like you to work through. You can do it in your mind, but if you have a pen and paper, that would be really handy. And so take a moment to get that. And then Mieko and I will return to some discussion at the end, and there'll be space for you to ask questions at the end as well. So this nonviolent communication process that Marshall Rosenberg developed really has two core concepts: honesty and empathy. And those can be applied when we speak to other people, which is what we'll be talking about next Thursday. But they can also be applied with how we speak to ourselves. And that's the self-empathy piece and the self-honesty piece. And that's down in the trunk of this tree, in this tree metaphor. And so that's where we're going to begin today. And anytime I'm practicing this process in relation to even conflict out in the world, or negotiation, or anything like that, mediation, I always want to root myself in the self-empathy piece. And so down at the bottom of the screen, you can see the rocks and the dirt that the tree is rooted in. And that's where we begin. We begin in the rocks and the dirt, just the same way a tree does. And any of you who are familiar with maple sugar, maple syrup, and maple tapping, you know that when you put a tap in the side of the tree, you get a sweet sap out of it. You don't get the rocks and the dirt. And the reason for that is that the tree is beautifully designed to filter out the rocks and the dirt, and to draw up the nutrients, to draw up what is life-serving. And trees are just so magical, because in addition to that, they take in the carbon dioxide that's so harmful to us, and they breathe out the oxygen that we need. And so in this metaphor, I want to invite us to also think about, in our thinking, where do we get into the rocks and the dirt? How can we filter that up into the things that are life-serving, and breathe out oxygen when we're speaking, and also when we're listening? So that's where we're going to begin. That's the metaphor we're going to work with. And I think many of you also have a handout that has a more complex version of this, but this is the simple outline. Honesty and empathy in the nonviolent communication process have 4 steps, or 4 components. And we don't want to think about these things in a rigid way, but this is a good touchstone to have an idea of what are some of the ways that we can filter the thoughts that put us down in the rocks. And so the first is an observation. What did I actually see or hear? The next is my feeling. What feeling comes up in relation to my observation, which is very different than my feelings that come up in relation to my thoughts of judgment and shame and blame. So what did I actually see or hear? How do I feel about that? What needs are there? What needs or values are those feelings pointing towards? And then what are some requests I can make? Requests for connection and requests for action. So on your piece of paper, I'm going to ask you if you can, and some of you may want to do this in the shape of the tree, so you're welcome to way down at the bottom, write out, so first let me describe this. I want you to think about a recent situation that was frustrating, that left you feeling shame or guilt or resentment, left you with labeling or thinking that you didn't really like, and that you wish that you could kind of have dealt with differently. And I want you to think of a situation that's got a mild to medium spice, because we're practicing right now and you probably have to get on with the rest of your day afterwards. So mild to medium spice so that it's lively, but not too hot. And what I want you to write down are your 1 or 2 guilt or resentment thoughts. And I'll give you an example before you do that. So Mieko gave me a scenario, for example, where maybe I've been helping my care recipient all day, and I've been neglecting my family and my work and my personal needs in the process, and eventually I just lose my patience and my temper, and I kind of snap at my care recipient when they say, don't go, I need you, I want you to still stay. So I'm going to have all kinds of thoughts around that, thoughts about my care recipient and thoughts about myself, and perhaps even thoughts about my family, I don't know. So if I want to write down 1 or 2 guilt or resentment thoughts at the bottom of the page, down where the rocks and dirt are, I might be saying to myself some really hard shoulds, and should language is a good clue that we're down in the rocks and the dirt. So I shouldn't have lost my temper. I shouldn't be neglecting my family, or I shouldn't rely on others at work. This is my problem, and I shouldn't have to be accommodated at work, or I should know better, or I should be a better caregiver. So those shoulds, that's in the rocks and the dirt. Sometimes the rocks in the dirt can sound like blame or labeling as well. And so we hear that when we say, oh, well, gosh, I'm a monster. I just snapped at this person and they're really suffering and struggling. And how, who do I think I am? I'm such a monster. I'm such an idiot or a jerk. Or I might have labeling about other people. Oh, my siblings. Well, they're just reckless and without, they're irresponsible, and it's them, it's all my siblings. And some of us are very good at flipping back and forth between labeling other people and labeling ourselves. And so I want you to just narrow it down to 1 or 2 thoughts of guilt, resentment, shame, their should thoughts, or labeling thoughts, or blaming thoughts. 1 or 2 thoughts. Even if you can narrow it down to 1, that would be ideal for this exercise. So hopefully you've done that while I've been chatting. And I'll continue working with that example I gave you, just so you can hear how this unfolds. So the first step is we're filtering up the tree. If you've written that down at the bottom of your page, we're going to filter up the tree, and we begin the filtering with an observation. So an observation is distinct from evaluation or judgment. So if I say, I shouldn't have lost my temper, that's still a judgment. Even if other people would agree with my judgment, it's still a judgment. The should lets me know that. So I want to know, what did I actually see or hear? What is the specific thing that I saw or heard or did? It's rooted in my sensory information. And so my observation in this situation would be, my care recipient said, direct quote, don't go. And I said, direct quote, you're so demanding, and I've been here all day, and how can you just keep asking me to go on like this, or whatever I might have said. So those are the direct quotes. That's my observation. So I want you to think about what your observation is. And on this page, I'm just inviting you to separate out your judgments, your evaluations of your behavior, your words, or your evaluations of other people from the actual observation. So when we look at this picture, I might say, oh, that's scary or silly or pretty or interesting. Those are all observations. They're useful. Those are all judgments. They're useful, but they're not observations. The observation would be, I see one picture with black eye makeup that looks kind of like a skeleton, and I see one picture with a pumpkin lantern and a face with the mouth that goes like this, and I see another picture with the hands like this and flowers and a smile. Those are the observations, not scary, silly, you know, pretty, whatever. So on your filter, what did you actually see or hear? What is the specific description? So the next step is to figure out, how do we feel? As we're filtering up the tree, we want to go from our observation to our feelings. So often we're going from our judgments and our evaluations to our feelings. So if I go from I'm a monster or they're ungrateful into my feelings, I get really caught up really in the rocks and dirt quite a lot, because I'm mixing my thinking, my judgments, with intense emotions. And I want to separate those out a little bit just to get clearer on what is actually going on here. So what am I actually feeling? These are the emotions, the sensations that are in my body, they're in my heart, they're in my gut, and they're free from evaluation. So my quickest way to share this with you, because our time is so short, is to imagine that you're Tom Hanks in the movie Castaway, and you're all alone on an island with a volleyball named Wilson. And so, and it's not a spoiler to tell people that Tom Hanks is stranded in the movie Castaway on an island with a volleyball named Wilson. So on that island, Tom Hanks cannot experience being manipulated. He can't experience being used or taken for granted, or he can't experience these kinds of things. Why? Because it requires another person to do something, and for me to judge that behavior as manipulative behavior, or as using behavior, or taking for granted behavior. Those aren't the feelings. When I judge something like that, I might feel sad or despondent or discouraged or disappointed. Those are the feelings. So the feelings are something you can experience alone on an island with a volleyball named Wilson. And if you are tempted to put a pronoun after it, he, she, it, you, it's also probably not a feeling. I feel you, I feel he, I feel she. You're probably about to say an evaluation. If you go around explaining that to other people, they will get irritated. So just do your own translating in your head. But Tom Hanks on his island can feel despair. He can feel loneliness. He can feel pride when he catches his first fish. He can feel relief when it finally rains and he can gather fresh water. He can feel fear. He can feel delight. All these things are those sensory and emotional things. So as you filter up from your statement of judgment, what was the observation? Want to get that concrete, and then thinking about the observation, what is your feeling? So we don't want to be reflecting on the feelings that come out of the judgment. We want to think about the feelings that are linked to what I saw or heard. So take a moment now and just look at your situation. How might you be feeling? What is going on in there? There might not be a word. It's okay to just say there's a tension at the back of my skull, or a tightness in my throat. Sometimes our body lets us know we're feeling something before we can even put language on it. Maybe you're feeling exhausted. Maybe you're disappointed. Maybe you're sad. Maybe you're irritated or frustrated. Maybe you're overwhelmed. You know, maybe, I don't know what it might be. Resigned. Maybe you're curious. Whatever the feeling is, we want to get that kind of word. And you can use the handout that I shared with you, or that you would have received from OCO, that has the faces, the happy and sad faces on it, to help you avoid using that thought language. That's a useful cheat sheet. So the feelings, these feelings, here's the magic of feelings. They are like notifiers for this system that we live in. And the feelings are notifiers letting us know that something matters. And so in most of our conversations in colonial settler society, we talk about feelings quite a lot, but we don't really talk about what they point towards. And I'm going to guess that most of you have some kind of cell phone or electronic device or a landline. And when it gives a notifier, it rings, I'm going to guess that most of you pick that up. And if you don't pick it up immediately, that you pick it up fairly soon after you know that it has rung. And when I ask people about this question, why do you pick it up so quickly? Almost everybody says because it could be important. And so I just want you to think about this. Your body, your system, your head and your heart and your guts, your whole system is more elegant and complex than anything IBM or Apple will ever develop. And your system is giving you notifiers all the time about things that matter. And when was the last time you opened up the message to find out what mattered so much? And so that's what we're going to do right now. And that's the needs. The needs are the text message or the voicemail or the phone message coming in. The needs are what lets us know how to survive and thrive. And our needs don't just let us know how we can survive and thrive. Our needs let us know how our relationships can survive and thrive, how our communities, how the world around us can survive and thrive. And we are literally hardwired in our brains that when we witness unmet needs in the world around us, in nature, in each other, we experience pain in ourselves. And when we witness needs beautifully met, we experience delight and joy and pleasure. And it's never to the same degree as when it's satisfied for us personally, but we experience fairly high levels of distress and delight, depending on how needs are being met in the world around us. So when we're thinking about needs, we want to separate that from strategies. So money, for example, is a favorite strategy for many people in the global north and the west, and particularly in colonial settler societies. But money is not the only economic system on the planet. Certainly hasn't existed universally or since the beginning of time. Money's one way to meet a lot of needs. It's a strategy. And other societies, lots of societies have other ways. And even people within settler colonial society have different ways, through gift economy, through trade, through all kinds of different means of taking care of needs. So we want to think about, when we're thinking, is it a need or is it a strategy? We want to think about, is this something that every human being and even every primate perhaps has needed, since it has required to survive and or thrive since the beginning of time? So meaning and purpose, creative expression, belonging, connection, shelter, that's the umbrellas in this picture, food and nourishment, air, water, these are all things that are necessary for thriving and surviving. And we have many different cultural strategies, different personal strategies, different strategies that our communities and societies have supported us in developing in order to meet those needs. The needs themselves are universal. They're not in conflict with each other. It's the strategies that are often in conflict with each other. And our needs are independent of specific people or places. So if I'm in a conflict with somebody and I'm in distress and my need, so for example, in this situation where I've been helping somebody, and in that situation, maybe my need is for rest, and maybe it's also for acknowledgement. And that need is in me, whether or not the person who set that off ever does anything about it. So when I go home or I go somewhere else, I'm still walking around with depleted needs around acknowledgement, around rest. And so I have a responsibility to tend those needs, to fill up my own cup so that I have something to offer others and so that I can receive from others as well. So I want you to think about, in relation to your situation, as you're filtering up from the rocks and dirt, you've got your clear observation, you've checked in with your feelings, the notifier. And now we want to dive a little more deeply. If you have that handout with the happy, sad faces handy, you can look at that. But these are some big categories around needs, and we know that needs are co-occurring. They're not in a hierarchy. And there are lots of needs theories, and we know that Maslow's needs theory actually, for those of you interested, is informed by Blackfoot needs theory, that he actually stole that from. So that's a bigger conversation. I won't go into the details of that. But for this exercise, I want you to think about what is your need that feeling is pointing to. So if your feeling is exhaustion, perhaps the need is pointing to rest. But perhaps you're exhausted because you haven't had so much contact with other people. Perhaps it's a belonging need. Maybe it's a need for connection and community. Maybe it's a need for safety and well-being. Maybe you're exhausted because you've just been working so hard around survival-based stuff, and there's some real needs around safety or survival. Maybe it's a need that has to do with self-actualization, with meaning and purpose, with creative expression, with things like that. We want to know what the need is so that we can develop strategies that actually meet it. Because if my habitual strategy is to have a glass of wine at the end of the day, and my need was actually belonging and connection, then it's not going to satisfy it. I'm going to still be unsatisfied at the end of that strategy. I want to make sure that I'm finding strategies that are linked to the needs. And the only way to do that is to open the text message and find out, what do I actually need? So on your filter, I want you to see if you can identify a need. And again, to help you avoid strategies sneaking in, you can use the needs list at the top of that happy and sad face sheet. If you don't have that sheet, that's fine. Or if it's not easy for you to get at, you can just look at this and imagine lists of words that are linked with things like belonging or safety or community well-being and things like that. So there's a phrase that I like to encourage people to say when they identify the need, and it's no wonder. So I want you to pause right now, just for a moment, and look at that word that you've written down, the need that matters so much to you, the thing that you're yearning for in the middle of this frustration, the need for respite and rest, or the need for support and connection, maybe a need for information. It could be a need for acknowledgement and recognition. And just take a moment and say to yourself, oh, no wonder I'm so frustrated. No wonder I snapped. This need is so precious to me. This need for nurturance, the need for information, or the need for connection, whatever need you wrote, is so precious. It's so precious to me, and it's precious to every human being. Any human being would be in distress if they were worried this need was going unmet. No wonder the pain. And we can see images here of folks who are supporting each other's needs, folks who may be experiencing needs not being met in the way that they would most like. And sometimes there are needs that we become aware of, needs we've carried since we're children, or needs that come up as we witness somebody's health deteriorating in a way that you know we wish weren't happening, or that they wish wasn't happening. And we know that our need for well-being, or our need for independence, or our need for healing is maybe not going to be met in the way that we would most like. And we can say no wonder and just hold space for that impulse of life as it rises up in us. The ache that surrounds those needs is proportionate to how much we value them, how much we stand for that in ourselves and in the community. It probably informs why you're doing the caregiving work you're doing in the first place. So I really like to invite people to just honor the needs, even before you begin coming up with strategies. Sometimes the best way we can meet a need is to turn our inner compassionate gaze towards that aching part of ourself the same way we would turn towards a distressed child and just say, oh, hello. Hello again, old friend. I recognize you. Welcome. There's room for you here. And to just make room, to just make room. So this is a really important piece I want you to take a moment to sit with. And I also know that many of you want strategies. And so when we're speaking to other people, we talk about strategies for connection and action. And that no wonder statement, that is a request for connection of myself, to say no wonder and connect with myself around how it is for me when I notice how important that need is to me. And we can also make requests for action. And I'm sure that some of you are saying, okay, well, that's all well and fine to connect with what's going on in me, but I really want to do something about it. So there are 4 ways that I invite people to do something about it. And so we're still filtering up the tree. You've gone from your judgment and you filtered it up to what did I actually see or hear? And you've linked that with a feeling, oh, there's this notifier going off in me. And then I've noticed, oh, that has a need for, that's associated, it's pointing to a need for rest or respite, a need for acknowledgement and consideration. And now, and I've said no wonder, and I've really honored that. And now I'm going to develop some strategies. And this is really hard for lots of people, but I want you to find ways to meet that need separate from the situation that set it off. And this is really liberating. You have power in relation to your own needs. And when you give that power over to somebody who cannot or will not meet them, you lose the capacity to claim that power, and also you set yourself up for something that's going to be inevitably disappointing and distressing. There are many people who can't or won't meet our needs, intentionally or unintentionally, and we want to be mindful of that and realistic about it. So when we're noticing something has come up in ourselves, we want to come up with what are some ways I can take care of that for myself. How can I fill my own cup? We will speak to other people. We will ask other people to help us with that. We may even confront the person who has brought this up in the first place, but that's next week, not this week. This week we're in the trunk of the tree. This week we're focusing on self-empathy, self-care, filling our own cup. So on your paper, I want you to write one way you can meet that need that you wrote alone. If it's a need for acknowledgement or a need for rest, how can you meet that need alone, separate from the situation, separate from anybody else? You could journal. You could meditate if you're a meditating person. You could pray if you're a praying person. You could work in your garden if you're a gardening kind of person. You could go for a walk. You could write a letter to yourself. You could stare at a flower. You could take a nap. You could, so you're starting to hear things that sound a lot like the self-care that Mieko mentioned at the beginning. The difference is these actions are linked to the need, so they're more likely to be satisfying. Step 2, 2 people. I want you to think about how you can meet that need with another person who is not the person or people who set this off. Where can you reliably go? Who can you reliably call on to meet your need for recognition or your need for rest? Who can you count on for that? I'd like you to write one thing down. 3, so you can think of 3 people, although I put 4 people there. I realize I should have probably put 3 to help make this follow the flow, but how can you meet that need in community? So if you remember what I said earlier, we are hardwired to experience at the level of our brains responses when we witness needs well met in the community around us. We can literally meet our own needs by increasing the experience of that need being met in the world around us. Who can I recognize? What could I do? How can I pay it forward, so to speak, around that need in community, separate from the situation that set me off? And finally, in nature, what can I do in nature to meet that need? If it's a need for recognition, is there something I could do to recognize the beauty or the power of nature? I could lean on a tree. I could look at an ant and be filled with wonder. I could work in my garden. That might serve two strategies here. I could breathe deeply in the air. I could go for a walk. I could play with a dog or a cat or feed my fish. These are things we often don't think about. The natural world around us is a rich, rich resource for meeting our needs, especially those huge needs that we think may never be met. Metaphorically and pragmatically, we can often meet them in nature. So I want you to write down one thing in relation to the natural world. So here we've traveled up this tree, we've begun down in the rocks at the bottom, and we've noticed our thoughts of shame and blame. We've paused and taken a breath and begun to filter up through the self-empathy, through the observation, the feelings, the needs, that no wonder statement, that self-connection and an action request. So this is the heart of self-empathy. Next week, we'll talk about how do we take that out into conflicts and stress, out when we're speaking honestly or listening with empathy when people are saying things that are hard for us to hear. And I'm going to pause there. I'm aware of the time, and I want to leave a few moments for some discussion with Mieko and to receive some of your questions, and we'll do our best to answer those questions in the next few minutes that we have. I think that Stacy and Susan are going to gather your questions so that we can respond. So Mieko, I would love to hear how it is for you to hear all of that in one piece. We've talked about it in fragmented ways on the phone, and I'm curious if anything comes up or if there's something you're wondering.
Yes, I had a question because I know about the needs are pertaining to the caregiver, but what do we do when the caregiver needs is in conflict with the care recipient's needs? And I'll give you an example, a personal example. So when one of my care recipients started losing mobility, and I wanted them to have a walker and fit that all out, and so I had the need of safety and physical safety as well. Like I wanted them to be safe and physically safe. My care recipient, on the other hand, didn't want to change, didn't want to have a walker. Exact quote, makes me look old and I will never fall. And I remember even saying to the person, you never choose to fall. It just happens. It's an accident. So when you have those conflicting needs, what can you do? That's
a wonderful question, Mieko. Thank you for that. So I want to highlight the fact that it's the strategies that are in conflict. So you have the strategy that the person should have a walker, and the other person has the strategy that they should not have a walker. So your need for safety and their need probably for dignity and perhaps for independence and autonomy, those needs are not in conflict. You also know the need for autonomy and dignity. You want that too. They also want safety. The needs are not in conflict. The conflict comes when one person believes that the strategy will interfere with the rest of their needs. So this safety strategy, they're maybe afraid is going to interfere with their needs for dignity and for choice. And so then we want, if we fight over the walker, we're never going to come up with anything. But if we get underneath that, and so this is really part of next week's conversation, but if we get underneath that and we say, oh, well, I'm really worried about your safety, and I'm wondering what's up for you. Are you really, thinking it's undignified and you would like to hold on to your freedom and your choice, your autonomy? Yeah, of course, that's what I want. Okay, well, let's come up with some strategies to make sure you're safe and you feel dignified. So like my partner's grandfather went to all kinds of lengths to create tools to hold himself up without resorting to a walker. And, it was wild. I think at one point he had a baby stroller that he had fitted out and was using because he would rather use that than a walker. It held him up. It still supported him. So, we have to be creative, and the creativity comes when we tap into the level of needs and realize that it's the strategies that are in conflict.
Thank you, Marion.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thanks, Mieko. So I'm noticing in the chat, somebody says not wearing hearing aids is another example. Yeah. So somebody, is it's not that this person is determined to stay vulnerable. I think it's really important to recognize that anytime somebody's doing something, they're trying to meet a need, they just don't know how, and they may not even have the language, particularly in earlier generations, they may not have the language to be able to say what the need is. And so it can be helpful for us to, first of all, self-empathize. We're frustrated. We want that person to be safe. We want them to be able to hear us. We're frustrated. So we have to start from a place of self-empathy. Otherwise, we're speaking to them from irritation and demand, right? And anytime I exert demand or domination on somebody else, they will either submit or rebel, and I will pay both ways. If they submit, I get passive aggressiveness back from them. If they rebel, I just get overt, rejection about the idea. So in terms of the hearing aid, for example, that I see somebody has mentioned, I would want to find out, why don't they want to wear the hearing aid? Is it about comfort? Like, what is the need? If it's a need about comfort, then maybe there are ways we can figure that out. If it's a need about independence or a need around dignity, and I come up with a comfort-based strategy, they're just going to get irritated. So do you see how the need really helps me figure out what it is? How do I serve? How do I support the other person? I see somebody else is saying we need to discuss the fact that emotions as pointers aren't necessarily always speaking the truth. Yeah, our emotions are very unpredictable. They come and they go. And if we stay focused on the emotions, we don't ever really get to what matters. The emotions are just the notifiers. So anytime I have a contracted, tight emotion, it's letting me know a need is going unmet in me or around me. The emotion doesn't tell me what the need is. It only tells me a need is going unmet. The same way a bell ringing on my cell phone only tells me a message is coming in. It says nothing about what the message is. So contracted feelings refer to an unmet need in me or that I'm witnessing. Expansive emotions where I can breathe easier have to do with needs that are being met well. And I want to pay attention to that too, so that I can do more of that.
I want to thank the participants who joined us today and remind you that Marion will be back with us next week, and we're going to be talking about compassionate communication with others. So taking this from the internal to the external communication, all revolving around the theme of reducing conflict. I'd like to invite you, participants, to visit our website. There's free information and resources on online peer support groups, downloadable sheets and resources, caregiver mental health, educational resources, as well as additional resources that are directly related to COVID-19. On behalf of the Ontario Caregiver Organization, I'd like to thank our speakers today and all of you who have attended. We hope that you can join us for future events and continue to share the work we do at the OCO as a free resource for all caregivers in Ontario. Please visit the website. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you.